Hey everyone, it's Matthew Kent. Welcome to Theology on the Ground. So today, talking about God's sovereignty again. I talked about this on a previous episode of this little daily vlog, but that one was, I believe, out of the Psalms, and it was just an assertion that, maybe it was out of Proverbs, that God is sovereign. And of course, one of the great difficulties then that comes up, well, if God is sovereign, which I've already asserted that he is, how does he hold human beings responsible for their actions? Because he ultimately planned everything that happened. To echo a question put forward by Paul, as Paul is imagining an objector to his teachings in Romans chapter 9, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? So that's the objection. If God is sovereign and he's ultimately in control of everything that happens, then why does he judge human beings for basically carrying out the plans that he already had? It's a tough question. I can't lie. I can't get away from that. It's a tough question. And today in my quiet time, I was tackling Isaiah chapter 10, which I think is probably the clearest and best answer we have to that question in the whole Bible. So, if you will, just come along and read this with me and think about it, and we'll wrestle through this issue together. This is God speaking, Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5. Ah, Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in their hands is my fury. Against the godless nation I send him, and against the people of my wrath I command him, to spoil and seize plunder, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. So those are verses 5 and 6. Now here's what he's saying. He's saying, Assyria, you're like a tool in my hands. You're like the rod of discipline for me. I'm using you to discipline Israel. Israel is the godless nation that he references, right? Israel's turned away from God. God is going to discipline them now using Assyria. And so that's what he's saying. So here's verse 7. But he, talking about Assyria, but he does not so intend. That's a critical word. And his heart does not so think, but it is in his heart to destroy and to cut off nations, not a few. Okay, so let's just stop right there. So we have the concept introduced here of dual intentions, that God intends one thing, but the people intend another, and their intention is not lined up with God's. So God wants to discipline, to correct, to punish Israel for iniquity, but Assyria has a goal too. They have an intention, and it's just to lift up themselves. It's to destroy. It has nothing to do with God's purposes. So when you think about, for instance, like a murder that happens, and the unfortunate truth is that God is sovereign and even decrees murder, God, in his sovereign good wisdom, gets to choose the length of time each of us walk this earth. None of us are obligated 80 years, 90 years, whatever it is we'd like to live. So if a young man at age 25 is murdered, God decided graciously to give that man 25 years. And it's important to remember it's 25 years more than that man deserved. Now, his murderer was, in a certain sense, used by God, but in another sense, the murderer was going against God's decrees. God said, you shall not murder. So in one sense, it's God's will for human interaction, for murder to not happen. But in the grand scheme of things, God is going to use that murder to bring about the desired outcome that he has. And we know that he's working all things together for good to those who love him and to those who are called according to his purpose. And God's going to be glorified by that murder eventually, either through pouring out his wrath upon the murderer, or through the amazing act of miraculously saving that murderer and turning him into a new creation through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross in the place of that murderer, should he accept the free gift of salvation that Jesus gave to him. So that's kind of how this works. I'll just read a little bit more here. I'm skipping ahead. This is verse 12. When the Lord has finished all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will punish the speech of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the boastful look of his eyes. For he says, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom I have understanding. So I'll just stop there. So it's God is very strongly against arrogance, and the people who are breaking God's law are not doing it for the sake of God. There have been some throughout history who have claimed that, but the vast majority are doing it for the sake of creating, it's basically establishing themselves as God, doing things for their own purposes. So that's the best that I can wrestle with this issue of God's sovereignty. It's a great one to think about, to read about. Romans 9, Isaiah 10, I think, are the places in the Bible that come closest to wrestling with these issues. So check those out. Look at them. Hopefully it's fruitful for you, useful to you, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.